He never mailed the letter. He didn't stamp it, didn't seal it, didn't slide it into the outgoing bag like the others. He kept it folded so many times the crease became permanent, like a road on a map that you could follow with your thumb in the dark. And the reason it stayed in his pocket wasn't fear of what it said. It was the opposite. It said too much of what was true. The kind of truth that makes a man stare at a blank wall and realize he's carrying two wars at once, one overseas and one inside his chest. When the envelope finally surfaced decades later, tucked behind a framed photograph in a family drawer, it still smelled faintly like paper and metal and time. There was a date at the top in careful handwriting, and a name below it that made the family go quiet. To my son. Not to my wife. Not to my parents. Not to anyone who will write back. To my son. The problem was, the son he wrote it to would not be born for another 3 years. That single detail turned the whole letter into something bigger than memory. It became a promise made before a child ever took his first breath. It became the purest form of American duty, carrying tomorrow on your shoulders, even when today is heavy. His name was Jack, and like a lot of men from that generation, he wasn't raised to talk about feelings as a hobby. He was raised to do the job in front of him, and to keep his word. He grew up in a town where people waved at each other from porches, where fathers came home tired, and where mothers somehow made the house feel safe even when the world outside was shifting. Jack wasn't a poet. He was practical. He fixed things. He listened more than he spoke. He believed in country, in family, and in the simple idea that you don't take freedom for granted because you didn't build it alone. When he left to serve, he carried the same things so many Americans carried: a folded picture, a few small comforts, and a quiet confidence that whatever happened, he would come back and build a life that made it all mean something. Most people imagine a soldier's courage as a single bold moment, but courage usually looks like routine. It looks like getting up, doing your part, and holding yourself together when nobody is clapping. It looks like helping the man next to you keep moving. It looks like writing home even when you don't know what to say, because you understand that the people you love are fighting their own battle back home, the battle of waiting. Jack wrote often, but he wrote carefully. He avoided details that would keep his wife awake at night. He avoided words that would turn a porch light into a spotlight. He focused on the small things because the small things are what keep a family steady. The kettle on the stove, the radio in the kitchen, the familiar habits that say, "We are still us." But the unsent letter wasn't careful. The unsent letter was honest in a way that felt dangerous, not because it was graphic, not because it described violence, but because it admitted something that patriotic Americans understand deeply and rarely say out loud. It admitted that service changes a person, not in a way that makes him less, but in a way that makes him heavier with meaning. It admitted that coming home isn't simply walking through a door. It's learning how to be the man your family remembers while carrying the man you had to become to do your duty. Jack wrote the letter late in the evening by dim light, the kind of light that makes paper look warmer than it is. Somewhere nearby, other men were trying to sleep, trying to laugh, trying to pretend tomorrow was ordinary. He pulled out the page and wrote the first line like a confession, not to a judge, but to someone he hadn't even met yet. "Son," he wrote, "I don't know your face, but I know your future matters." Then he paused, and you can almost feel it in the way the pen moved afterward, slowly, deliberately, like a man choosing each word as if it would become a foundation. He told his son, that he wanted him to grow up in a country where he could speak freely, work hard, and build a life without looking over his shoulder. He told him that there were places in the world where people didn't get that chance, and that men like him were sent so that those chances could keep existing back home. He didn't write it like a speech. He wrote it like a father who wanted his child to understand that pride doesn't come from noise. Pride comes from responsibility. He promised his son he would teach him to respect the flag without turning it into a costume. He promised he would teach him to respect people who served without worshiping war. He promised he would teach him that strength is not the absence of fear, but the discipline to do what is right anyway. Then he wrote about home, and the tone softened into something almost tender. He described a porch light as if it were a lighthouse. He described coffee as if it were a sacrament. He described his wife's hands as if they were the safest place on earth. He told his son that love is not the big moments. Love is the daily decision to show up. He told him that his mother was strong in a way that would never make a headline, and that if the boy ever wondered what real courage looked like, he should look at the woman who kept the house running while the mail came slowly and the nights were too quiet. Halfway through the letter, the purpose shifted. It stopped being only about what he wanted to pass down and became about what he needed to admit. He wrote that there were days he felt older than his age. He wrote that he didn't want his family to see him come home bitter or distant. He wrote that he was afraid of disappointing them, not because he doubted his love, but because he knew love alone doesn't erase everything you've carried. He wrote that when the war ended, he didn't want to be celebrated as if the story was only triumph. He wanted to be welcomed as a man, returning to a life worth protecting. He wanted to earn normal again. He wanted to sit at a table and talk about nothing, and feel like nothing was a gift. That is the kind of patriotism that makes Americans proud in a clean way. It's not pride that needs an enemy. It's pride that needs a home. It's pride rooted in gratitude. Gratitude that someone went when they were asked. Gratitude that families held the line. Gratitude that a country stayed intact enough for a child to be born into peace. When Jack wrote those lines, he wasn't chasing legacy. He was trying to ensure it. He was trying to build a bridge from chaos to calm, from uncertainty to ordinary life, from service to fatherhood. He ended the letter with a promise that reads like the kind of vow men used to make without fanfare. He promised he would come home and do the quiet work of being a good man. He promised he would be present. He promised he would not let the weight in his chest turn into hardness. He promised he would teach his son to respect veterans, to honor service, and to live in a way that makes sacrifice matter. And then he wrote a final line that explains why the letter stayed unsent. He wrote, "If I don't send this, it's because I want to hand it to you myself. I want you to know the truth from my voice, not from paper." He folded it. He kept it. He carried it like a private oath. Years later, Jack did come home. He married. He built a life. He became a father. And like so many men of that era, he didn't sit his children down to describe his service in detail. He didn't make himself the center of a story. He worked. He provided. He loved in practical ways. He fixed what broke. He showed up. He took his son fishing. He taught him how to shake a hand firmly and look a man in the eye. He taught him how to stand for the flag without needing to perform anger toward anyone else. He taught him that patriotism is not something you post. It's something you live. You pay your debts. You keep your promises. You respect the people who carry burdens you never had to carry. The son grew up and noticed his father's habits before he understood their meaning. The way he liked the porch light on, the way he sat quietly in the kitchen for a moment before joining the conversation, the way he kept letters and papers neatly stacked even when nobody else cared, the way he didn't waste words, the way he treated veterans with a calm respect that wasn't loud but was unmistakable. And as the years passed, the son learned something Americans often learn later in life. There are parts of your parents you don't meet until you are old enough to recognize them. When Jack passed, the family found the letter behind a photograph in a drawer. It wasn't hidden like a secret. It was kept like something valuable that didn't need attention. The envelope was blank because it was never meant for the mail. It was meant for a hand-to-hand transfer that never happened the way he imagined. Maybe there was never a perfect day to hand it over. Maybe he waited for a moment that felt right, and time moved faster than he expected. Maybe he thought his son already knew everything that mattered. And maybe, in a way, he did. But paper has a way of saying what men sometimes can't, even when they love deeply. The son read the letter slowly, not because the words were hard, but because the meaning was. He realized his father had written him into existence before he existed. He realized his father was already trying to protect him before he ever held him. He realized that his father's quietness wasn't coldness. It was discipline. It was a man who refused to let his family carry what he carried. And that understanding turned the letter into a legacy. Not a legacy of battle, not a legacy of violence, but a legacy of character. That's the part of these stories that deserves to be told, especially now, because in a loud world, the quiet virtues get overlooked. Duty gets mocked. Restraint gets misunderstood. Sacrifice gets simplified into slogans. But a letter like this restores the truth. It shows that service is not about loving war. It's about loving home. It's about making sure the next generation has the chance to live ordinary lives in peace. It's about doing what needs to be done, and then coming back and building something good. At the end of the episode, we return to the porch light again, because that's the symbol that keeps the story grounded. The son, now older, stands on his own porch one evening and flips on the light without thinking. Then he stops, because suddenly he understands he isn't just turning on a bulb. He's continuing a ritual that started before he was born. He's honoring the unseen chain of responsibility that carried his family through uncertain years and delivered them into ordinary peace. He's teaching his own child something without a lecture, that gratitude is a practice, and honor lives in the small things. This is Stories of Honor. Letters, memories, legacy. If you've ever found a letter that changed the way you saw someone you loved, share it in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe, because some letters don't get mailed, but they still arrive exactly where they're meant to, right when a family is ready to understand.